Hi everyone, Victor here again, and in today's lesson, we'll be looking at the topic how to create and manage groups in Linux. There are two types of groups in Linux. We have the primary group and we also have the secondary or the supplementary group. A primary group is a group that is created by default whenever users are created. Hence, a primary group name would take the name of the user, meaning that whenever a user is created, the user becomes a member of a group which is its own primary group. A secondary group are other groups that users can be added to. A secondary group is usually created by a user and not created by default. So let's understand the attributes of a group. Whenever groups are created, either primary or secondary group, the group information are stored in the etc/group file. So let's check this file. I'm just going to cut the file, which is etc/group file. So you can see the number of groups, you can see the types of group we have here. So what I'm going to do is to create a new group so that we can understand this properly. And for me to create a new group, I'm going to use the command group add followed by the name of the group. And so let's say we want to create a group name called sales. And if I press enter, the group has been created, and if I do cat etc group again, you can see that I have the name of the group here, which is sales. So let's understand these parameters. So the first parameter is the group name, which is sales, and the second parameter, which is this x, represents the group password. The group password is always stored in the file etc/gshadow. For the user, I mentioned that the user password is stored in etc/shadow in our previous lesson, but for the group, it's going to be stored in etc/gshadow. And you should also know that passwords are not usually created for groups. However, you can create passwords for group if you wish to do that. And the third field here, which is 1010, this represents the group ID. So in this case, the sales group ID is 1010. And if you have users in this group, you will see the name of the users here. So what I'm going to do is to add a user to this group, or I'll just add two users to this group so that you can understand what I'm trying to say. And for me to add a user, I can just say user mode, that's user modification. So if I want to add a user to the group, I'll just say user modification A, then G, then I'm just going to say yeah, let me add the users Lisa, and I'm going to say sales. So forget about how I am adding a user to a group. When we get to the auto section, I'll explain all of this to you. So I'm just doing this so that you can understand what I'm trying to explain here. Sales, okay, it has to be the group name sales followed by the username, which is Lisa. So if I do cat etc group, so you can see what I'm trying to say now. Because I've added Lisa to this sales group, you can see that we now have Lisa here. So I'm going to add another user to this group. Let's add the technique user. So if I say enter and I do etc/group, you can see now that we have the technique user. So these other fields will display the number of users that are in the group. So having understood the attributes of a group, let's get to the action time section, which is the how to section, so that we can see the step-by-step guide of how to create and manage a group on Linux systems. Currently, I am on a Red Hat system, and if you remember, I mentioned that a primary group is created whenever a user is created. So let's create a primary group, meaning that we will need to create a user. So for example, if I create the user, let's say user add Ola, for example, and I say enter. So if I do cat etc slash group, you can see that the group Ola2 has been created, and you can see that the group ID is 1012. And so if I do cat etc slash password, you can see the user Ola, and you can see that the group ID, that the primary group ID is 1012. So this ascertains the fact that whenever you create a user, by default, a primary group is also created for that user, meaning that that user will be in that group, which is the primary group. And most of the time, you will not even be creating a primary group. You will be creating secondary groups on Linux system. And the idea is when you create a secondary group or when you create a group, then you can add users to the group. So let's see how we can create a secondary group. So to create a secondary group, you will use the command group add followed by the name of the group. So for example, let's create the group HR. So if I do enter and if I do cat etc slash group, you can see that we have the HR group now that has been created, and we have the group ID to be 1013. So whenever you want to create a group, you use the command group add followed by the name of the group. So another thing we're going to do is to add a user to a group. And like I said, you're creating a group because you want to add users to the group. And this is where you need to be very careful. Whenever you're adding a user to a group in Linux, you need to be very careful. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to say group add. Okay, before I do that, you should know that the command that you will use to add a user to a group is user mode, which is user modification. So if I do user mode and I do dash h, which is help, you will see here that we have different flags, but this is where I want you to look at. If you look at this hyphen lowercase g, this is used to, it says first use group as a new primary group. So this is going to force a group to be a primary group. And if you look at this hyphen uppercase g, this is going to add a user to a list of supplementary or secondary groups. So meaning that if I want to add a user to a group or to a secondary group, I'm going to use the uppercase dash G. And this is where I want you to look at. You can see that we have dash A, which is append. So this is going to append a user to the supplementary group. If you're adding a user to a group or a supplementary group, like I said, when I'm mentioning a group, you should know that I'm talking about supplementary group or secondary group. So whenever you're adding a user to a secondary group and you do not use the dash A, which is the append option, what will happen is that the the users that are in the group before will be wiped out, and then you have the new user that you have added in the group. So see what I'm trying to say here. Okay, let's do cat etc group again. Okay, you can see that in this sales group we have the user Lisa and we have the user TechNeed. So now I'm going to try and add another user, which is TechNeed2, to this group, which is sales. So which means I'm going to say user mode, like I said, always use the append option followed by the G, meaning that I want to add the user to the supplementary group. Then I'm going to add it to this field and I want to add the user technique 2 here. So if I say enter and if I do cat etc slash group, you can now see that on for this sales group, I have the users Lisa Technique and I've just added another user Technique 2. Now let me add another user and here I'm not going to use the append option. So I have another user here which is okay, let's add the user John. So I'm just going to say John here and if I say enter and if I do cat etc slash group, okay, something is, oh, I think this works for RHEL 9. This works for RHEL 9. This is actually working. Interesting. Interesting. Let me add another user. Let's see. Warranty. And I say etc slash group. Okay, this is working. This is fine. This is fine. Then please just debunk what I just said about using the append option. So whether you use the append option or you don't use the append option, this works fine. Um, sorry, TT here. I do etc group. Okay, this works fine. In the previous RHEL versions, this doesn't seem to be working, but I think for now this works fine. So please just debunk that information. I would just want to quickly do something again. Dash H. Let's see. Append the user to the supplementary groups mentioned by the G without removing the user from other groups. Yeah, without removing the user and G now new list. So this is this is working fine for right now. Alright, so this is how you're going to either use the A option and the AG option or just the G option. This is working fine. We've been able to prove that here. So what we're going to learn again is we need to understand um, some other commands that we can use to manage groups. So for example, if you look at the group del, so let me do etc group again. So the group del command is used to delete a group. So if I want to delete the group HR, I'm just going to say group del HR. And if I do etc group again, you can see that I don't have the HR group here anymore. Another command we need to learn is the group mode command. So the group mode is used to modify groups. So if I do group mode dash H, you can see the different flags that you can use with group mode. Before I round off with this lesson, if you remember that in the previous lesson I mentioned that the passwords files for users are stored in, if you do etc slash shadow, you will see that the password files are stored here and it is encrypted while the user information is stored in etc slash password. So, and of course, you would see that when we did etc slash shadow, you would see the passwords file. So for Ola, you can see that the password is yeah, we don't have password for Ola. So for TT, you can see that the password is encrypted, right? So for TT here, you can see the information here for TT. So if you want to edit TT's information, of course, if you do VI etc slash password, you'll be able to edit TT's information. But you should know that the shadow file is also attached to the password file. So meaning that if you edit TT's information here, you will not be editing the information that has to do with TT in the shadow file. So the best thing you're going to do, or your best bet, is that when you want to edit this file, you can edit this file by using the command You can say, I'm trying to remember that command now. Um, I think it's that's vi password. So that's vpw. Okay. So if you say vi password, so if you edit city's information here, for example, so let's say I want to change city's ID to 1000 and let's say 55. That's the primary ID, and I say enter. So you can now see that it's saying that you've modified the etc password. You may need to modify the etc shadow for consistency. And if you want to do that, you would also say vipw-s, and you'll be able to modify the shadow file for TT. So this is a different case when you just say etc slash password, right? If you say etc slash password and you modify thesis file, for example, and you add, let's say I'm just adding 444 here and I say enter, you see that I did not get any information about editing the shadow file for TT. So you should know that the shadow file also works along with the password file. And more so, if you want to do this editing, it's better you use the command line to edit the user instead of going into the file itself. If you can go into the file itself and do your editing, well, that's for those that know what they are doing. But if you know that you're not too good with these files, just use the command to do your editing. Anytime you want to modify a user, just use your user mode command and modify the user. So this is also applicable to the group too as well. And I told you that for the group, you can, if you look at the etc g shadow file, right? So this is for the group. So for the group, you can just use the command. Um, this is going to be vigr. Yeah, vigr. So let's say I'm going to be editing the sales. I think I have sales here. So let's say I'm going to edit this to um 888. So because I have used the vigr command, so it's telling me to say to use the vigr-s command, and then I can edit whatever thing I want to edit. And like I said, we don't usually add passwords to group, but you can actually password a group if you want to. For those who are interested in Red Hat only or wants to write the RHCSA exam, this is where your section ends. So let's go to the Ubuntu section now. So for the Ubuntu section, let's look at the step-by-step guide. So I'm currently on an Ubuntu system right now. So we're going to look at the step-by-step guide of how to create and manage groups. It's actually basic. It's basically the same thing as Red Hat. But let's see. So let me just say sudo su Victor. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do first is to create a group. And like I've mentioned, I said that for you to create a primary group, you need to create a user. So whenever you create a user, the primary group is automatically created for that user. So if I use the command add user, let's say Ola user, and I can password Ola, and yeah, I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need this. This is correct. So if I do cat etc slash Ola, I mean slash password, so you can see that the user Ola has been created. And if I do cat slash etc slash group, you can see that the group ID for Ola I mean, the group OLA, which is the primary group, has also been created. So this ascertains the fact that whenever you create a user, a primary group too is automatically created. So that user will become a member of its own primary group. Well, like I've said in the radar section, you don't create primary groups. Um, you actually do create secondary groups in Linux. So most of the time, you'll be creating secondary groups. So for us to create a secondary group, you need to use the command group add. So the command group add is used to create a secondary group. So for example, if I want to create a group called finance, I'm going to say group add finance. And now if I do cat etc slash group, you can see that um I have the group finance, and this is the group ID for finance. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at how to add users to a group. So to add user to a group, you can use the command user mode, and yeah, I want to show you something here. If I do user mode dash h, which is the help option, you can see that here you have the hyphen uppercase G. This says that it's going to add users to the list of supplementary groups, and for the lowercase g, this is going to force a group to be a primary group, and for the dash a, this is to append a user to a supplementary group, and when you do append that user, it will not remove the other users that are in the group. So therefore, for me to be able to add a user to a group, so if I do etc slash group again, let's say group, so I'm going to say user mode followed by the append option, then the uppercase G option, which is I want to add the user to a supplementary group. So we have finance, the finance group, and then I can add the user Ola to the finance group. So if I say enter, and if I do cat etc slash group, you can see that Ola has been added to this group. So what I'm going to do again is to add the user technique to the finance group. So I can say technique here, and if I do etc slash group, you can see that I've also added technique, the technique user to the finance group. And what I'm going to do next is to add the user technique 2 to the finance group. But this time around, I'm not going to use the append option. So I'm just going to use the hyphen G option, and I'm going to say enter. And if I do etc slash group, you can see that I've also been able to add the user technique 2 to the finance group. So if you watch the radar section, I talked about the append, that's the hyphen ag, and that if you don't, and just like what we read when we used the help command, that if you don't use the dash a command, it's probably going to wipe off all the users that are in that group. But then I think for the higher versions of Linux systems, either use the append option, that's the dash a option, or you don't use the append option, you can add users to groups. So what we're going to do next is to understand some other commands that we can use to manage groups. So for example, we can use the userdel command. The userdel command is used to delete groups. So if I say userdel finance, this is going to delete the userdel finance. Sorry, not user del, I meant group del. Apologies for that. The group del command is used to delete the group. So if I say group del finance, this is going to delete the group finance. And now if I do cat etc slash group, you can see that the group finance is gone. So you can also use the command group mode. This command is used to modify groups, and if I say group mode dash h, you can see that you can see the different flags you can use with the group mode um command. So here And finally, whenever you want to modify a user, it is best that you use the user mode command. Um, However, if you know what you're doing, you can actually work on the configuration file, right? So, for example, like I've mentioned that in the previous lesson that the users are stored in etc password file. So if I do cat etc slash password, you can see that the users are stored in this file, and the passwords for these users are stored in etc slash shadow file. So if you want to edit a user, so for example, you want to if I do etc password, if you want to edit the user technique 3, for example, if you do vi etc slash password here and you um come to technique 3, right? So let's say you want to give the technique 3, you want to change the user ID, and you're changing the user ID to, let's say you're adding 999 here. If you say enter, you've been able to modify the user ID for technique 3. However, you should know that the shadow file is always attached to the etc password file. So you've not been able to modify the shadow file for Technic 3. So that's why it is what you would do in this case is that you just simply use the VIPW command. So by the time you use the VIPW command, whenever you change a user an information, or whenever you edit a user in the etc password file, it will also you will also be able to edit the information, the shadow information that is attached to that user. So if I do VIPW, for example, so it's asking me the editor that I want to use. So I'm just going to use the VIM editor, and then if I come to Technique 3, for example, and I had say 33 here, and I say enter, you can see that it's also saying that I have modified the etc password file. Then I also need to modify the etc shadow for consistency, and please use this command. So meaning that by the time I'm done editing the etc password file, I also need to use VIPW dash S to modify the shadow file. So I can also come here and modify the shadow file for Technic 3 so that there will be consistency. So what I've also said yes is also applicable to the group 2 as well. So for group, I said that the password file for group is stored in gshadow, etc gshadow, etc cat slash etc G shadow, right? And you can see that there is no password here, and just like I've mentioned that we don't usually create passwords for group. However, we can actually create passwords for group. So whenever you want to modify the group, instead of saying etc slash group, whenever you want to modify the group information, you can also use the command so that there can be consistency with the G shadow file. So you can use the command um that's VIGR command, right? So if you use the VIGR command, so let's say I want to edit let's say technique group, and I say 67, and I say enter, you can see that it's also asking me to use the VIGR command dash S so that I can edit the shadow file for that group. And by doing that, there's going to be consistency. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to this channel, like, share, comment. We also have some practice questions. I'll be dropping the link to this particular lesson for the documentation in the description box below so that you can follow through some quiz and some practice questions if you're going to be writing the exam. And whenever you comment, you share, you like, you subscribe, Whenever you do this, you will encourage us to do more of these videos. Thanks once more and bye for now.